today's session with Jennifer will help us learn a little bit more about ourselves and certainly about how to take care of ourselves. I wanted to introduce Reed, who we now have on a picture. I'm not sure what that means, but oh, there he is. And I wanted Reed before we started, and just not only to give some time to people to come in on the call. And I was right, because 10 people have joined us, 10 more people since when we started, to have Reed talk about a little of a project that we have called the Mosaic Project. And then Reed, after that, if you would maybe say a few words about the chat box and how people might use it as we're going forward, and might be able to have some time to look at parts of the chat, and we'll be kind of monitoring it to see if we could put things in categories. So Reed?
Okay, I'll start by talking about the Mosaic Project, which is an effort to try to both raise awareness of the efforts of compassion and raise a little money for the ongoing enterprise of the Charter. One of the beauties of this project is that it doesn't involve any requirement from you to donate any money, though we are always welcome your donation. The way that it works is we're putting together an online mosaic, a picture made up of little pictures, and the little pictures are pictures of all of us posting our good wishes on Twitter to the Charter for Compassion. And what we ask you to do is to post a picture of yourself or yourself and others or your organization on Twitter with the hashtag Faces of Compassion, and then also tag ZoomIn, ZUMUN _mosaics. And the details are available online. Just go to facesofcompassion.zoomin.com. And then you can find out exactly how easy it is just to post a picture. And for each picture that is posted, we'll get $1. And so we're hoping to get, we have matching money up to $10,000 if we can do it. So we'd sure love to have your pictures on Twitter tagging the Charter for Compassion. That's facesofcompassion.zoomin.com.
You know, Reed, I'm wondering if you couldn't post that in the chat box too.
I can.
And then for people who would like, there's a reference to it in our latest newsletter. And so you can grab a hold of those URLs at that point and learn a little bit more and get the hashtags that you need.
That's right. And I really encourage you not only to do it yourself, but to invite your friends to do it as well. It's a pretty easy thing to do. And when we're done, we'll not only have this online mosaic, but we'll also publish it as a banner that we can take and to events or present in locations such as the Dalai Lama's visit to Louisville in April. So please participate. Facesofcompassion.zoomin.com. And Marilyn, it is in the chat box now.
Okay, great. I saw that you put that in. And just a little note about the Dalai Lama coming to Louisville. It is around April 17th. I don't have the exact dates yet because I'm not quite certain that they have filled in all of the blanks. But the Festival of Faiths is a really incredible gathering of 3 days of people who are artists and philosophers, people who are in the world of ethics, representing a majority of the world's religions being present. It's an intimate grouping of people, just about 500 or so, but this year, obviously with the Dalai Lama coming, it's going to be a much larger affair, and the Charter for Compassion will be involved insofar as we will have a full day of sessions that will be devoted totally to the Charter and the work of the Charter. So I think that that's about it for introductions. I'm glad we took this time because we were able to get about 33 more people online from when we
Marilyn,
started. Yes.
I'd like to
Oh,
I'd like to describe a little bit about the way that the process will work.
yes.
Since Jennifer will be giving the bulk of the presentation, you are able on your screen to simply pin her video. If you right click on the image of Jennifer when she's speaking, you can pin it so that if there's any other noise, it would not pop the other faces up. And if you have a question for Jennifer, you can post a question in the Q&A box, and we will, as we answer them, either answer them in text online, or we can answer them and Jennifer can take them. We'll either pose them to her or she can read them herself. We'll decide how that goes. And chat is open. You can chat to individual people, or you can chat to everyone that's on the screen, so you can that's participating, so everyone can see the chat activity. And I saw that some people also raised their hands. That's a way to get attention for yourself. And if I see a raised hand, I will. 4 people, just 3 people, just 2 people just did. So I'll keep an eye on that as well. I hope you enjoy the presentation. I look forward to it myself very much.
Great. And so I should start out by saying that we, again, are very grateful for Jennifer to give us this time today. And she is a partner for the Charter for Compassion, a published author, a spiritual ecologist, an editor, a writing coach, with a primary objective to serve others that they may step into their own lives more fully with passion, wholeness, focus, fluidity, and with their own voice. And that is something that we all need to grab hold of in these days. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn this over to you, and certainly you might want to say a few more words about yourself before you start.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. First of all, I really want to thank the Charter. Marilyn and Reed have been incredible, including answering line-by-line questions that I was sending yesterday about how Zoom works. Welcome to all of you. This is my first time using Zoom, and it might be my first time not actually seeing my audience. So it's not as interactive as I'm used to, so bear with me. I do have some notes, some talking points to guide you through today. But I'd like to start with a quote by Karen Armstrong, who some of you might identify as the seed for this incredible work that the Charter for Compassion does. And the quote is this: "Compassion is not an option, it's the key to our survival." And what that means to me is that in these trying times, if we get aggressive and angry and clinging, clenching around the things that are disturbing to us, that cause us grief, that we're afraid of, it really does just sort of amp up that tension and the aggression we already feel. So what I'm calling for is for us to become softer and gentler in the world. And that's kind of a vulnerable place to be. So it does require a little bit of courage. And what I'll do today is offer you some practices, roughly 6. You'll have an opportunity to directly engage 3 of the writing practices ever so briefly, just to kind of get you started on how those feel. And I will describe 3 nature-based practices. These are things that I use personally as well as in my professional work. I think for now, Marilyn did such a lovely introduction that I will refrain from saying more about me. But what I would like to do is tell you how I envision the next hour and 20 minutes or so unfolding for all of us today. And I'm really relying on Reed, especially for tech support as we move into the final portion of this. So first, I'm going to give you some background about practices generally. What are practices? What do they mean to me? How are they? What is sort of the intention for them? And then, as I mentioned a minute ago, I'll give you a very, very brief time to kind of experience some of these so that you have some sense of how they might work for you. I'll give you some very simple how-tos for the nature-based practices because we are inside after all. I trust you all are, I am right now, but the idea is with the nature-based practices to actually get ourselves outside. And so I'll give you some ideas for how to do that. And then I will offer an invitation to action based on what we've done up to that point. And finally, the last half hour or so, I'm hoping will be a question and answer time where we'll be able to, you'll be able to ask whatever questions you have. And if people don't have questions, then certainly we can go in a little bit to how we can adapt these practices so that they really work for you, because we're starting with where we are with these practices. We're not striving to be somebody else. We're not, we're putting aside our overachiever hats and we're just showing up to these practices. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background, very, very generally. The practices that I offer are about deepening our understanding of our inner landscape, what's going on with us, especially in a time like this where some of the emotions and feelings and thoughts we're having are a little bit complex or conflicted. They're not tidy, you know, I'm not just sad or I'm not just afraid. I might be a lot of different things at the same time. And also generally these practices are about building a more rooted experience of our outer landscape. And literally, I mean the natural world, but I also mean relationships with others and our work in the world. So what are practices? They are intended, the intention behind them is to use them over and over again over time. And some of the things I offer you today are things I've been doing for 20 or 25 years. They're all, practices are also, they're like learning to play an instrument or running a marathon or learning a new sport. We do that thing over and over again to become more adept at it, not to become better in the sense that we think of, oh, there's a right way to do the practice or the wrong way to do a practice. Generally, I think what we want to do is to step into our lives more fully, to step into the world with more compassion. And how do we do that? Well, we might not know how to do that all at once, especially at a time like this that is challenging for so many of us. So practices are repeatable. They're very, very flexible and adaptable. And again, we'll have an opportunity at the end, or you can ask questions about this, how we can modify and tweak these practices so that they're really useful for you and where you are in your life right now. Practices are about right now. They're about this moment. And what I might choose to write in my journal right now might be different than a little bit than what I wrote 2 hours ago when I got up this morning, or what I might write tomorrow when some other things in life happen that shift me a little bit in my inner landscape. Practices strive for honesty. And with the writing practices, the beauty of these is that nobody needs to see what you write. So you can be as honest as you need to be on the page. And it's a way to kind of get these feelings and things we're thinking out of us a little bit, which can diffuse them a little bit, defuel them a little bit. Practices offer surprises and they can be very spontaneous. So we do practices with the understanding that sometimes they're going to come a little bit easier to us. That is, they'll feel a little bit better. And sometimes we show up to the page. I show up to the page. Wow, I really don't have anything to say. I have no idea how to untease this. And so what I would encourage you to do today when we do get to the writing practices is to really just let go as much as possible your expectations about how the writing looks on the page, what is actually coming out. Because sometimes there's a lot of, I like to call it the crust, a lot of stuff that's just there that needs kind of scraping off or moving aside so that we can really see what's there. And that comes over time. So trust your process, trust the writing and engage in that way. the beauty of practices is that we get to do them however we are in a moment. And if you're like me right now, you might have a little bit of grief that's hanging out. And that's one of the areas that we're going to talk about in a minute, and that you'll have a chance to practice moving through. So what do writing and nature have to do with all of this? Writing is a safe place to say, to convey, to write whatever it is we need to write. Sometimes in the privacy of a journal. The writing page doesn't judge us. It merely holds what we put down upon it. Writing is a process. We are part of the natural world and we are of nature. So why not get out there? Why not engage it? Why not build a relationship with the natural world? Nature also does not judge us. It merely holds and sustains us. Nature is inherently in process, as are we. And when we are vulnerable, seeking something, unsure about what to do next, or we're sad or afraid or whatever, we need to have ways to get these things out of us and to move through them. I say this a lot to people I work with, that we're not stepping over something, we're not avoiding that thing that's challenging. We actually want to step into it however we can in any moment, just so that then we can move through it. So in trying circumstances, I have identified a threefold pattern for moving through to wholeness, what I'm calling the antidote. By the way, I recognize that some of you might not actually have video capabilities. So when we get to the portion of my presentation where I'm going to have visual images, I will do my best to describe what is there so that people with audio only can still participate fully. So what is this threefold thing that I'm going to discuss today? One is acknowledging the grief. And grief is, for me anyway, is composed of what I fear and what I fear I might lose or what I might have already lost. We're also, the second piece of the antidote is to embrace compassion. The Charter for Compassion has taught me a lot how to do that. And it's compassion for ourselves and it's compassion for others. And then the third piece is being a kind action practitioner. That is, how do we actually do kindness, especially when we're feeling vulnerable? So now is the time. Get your pens ready, your pencils, your paper. I hope that you have those things with you. Usually when I offer these kinds of practices to people, I'm kind of rigid, I guess I'll admit, about how we do them. I ask people to bring unlined paper with them and to turn their page landscape orientation. But I get that we're on the phone and you might be someplace that all those things aren't available to you. So just do the best you can, put a pen on page, and I will guide you through the practices. So, things to remember: please write quickly, partly because that's a way to trick ourselves into not having to write everything we know and carefully craft it. This isn't a final product. This is just a process. So have fun with it, or be tender with it, but let your hand move quickly. You don't need to guess what's going to be on the page. Just spontaneously move your hand across that page. And if you are typing for some reason on a computer instead of handwriting, which some of you might be, or on a device, feel free to type. Just type your heart out as fast as you can go. And surprises can happen when we do that. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no expected outcome. And there's no need to share this with anybody. You get to keep this all to yourself. So if you see things on the page that you don't feel comfortable with, that's good. That means you got to something. But you don't need to feel like you need to share that with me or the group today in this call or with anybody. So we're going to move into grief first. We're going to deal with grief, compassion, and kind action. There are going to be 2 practices each that I will offer you. One will be a writing practice, one will be a nature practice. So get your pens ready. Here is the first writing prompt, and I'll give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes to do this, not very long, probably not long enough. But being that we want to get through some things, and this is just to kind of get you started. So take a minute, the first writing prompt. What have you lost? Or what are you afraid of losing? And how does that feel? So please now engage your page, your fingers on keyboard, your hand with a pen, and write about that. I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes. So finish up your sentence, your thought. Put your pen down, stretch your fingers a little bit if that was a lot of writing for you. Just sit with that for a second. That's only the barest start. I'll give you some ideas after I introduce the practices for how you can kind of what a good starting place might be if you're not used to writing on a regular basis, or if you're not used to writing about difficult feelings. So this practice allows us to let the non-judgmental page hold whatever is there for us in a moment. This is one way we can work with grief, is to just spew it onto the page. And if you feel like maybe you've only just, you only had just gotten started, that's good. That means there's something there that can be, that's ready to move through you. Okay? So I want to move now to a nature prompt, a nature practice that can help you when you're feeling grief, difficult feelings, frustration, anger, sadness, confusion. And so in preparation for introducing this practice, which obviously we're not going to do because we're sitting inside right now, most of us anyway, is to take a minute to consider for yourself what type of area in nature feels good to you. Where outside do you feel nurtured when you feel afraid or sad? And think about the landscape features. Think about weather or temperature. Think about location, geography. Feel free to write any of these things down for yourself. So keeping that place in mind, let me describe to you the very most basic way that we can engage the natural world in order to sort of offer us comfort when we need that. So to translate this, what you've just begun to think about, or what you might already know, if you have a practice of going out into the natural world when you're feeling something and you need a bigger space to help you hold that feeling, a nurturing space. So to translate that into practice, here's what I suggest you do. The first thing is to identify a place that is safe and comfortable, that's private, and that's easily accessible, someplace outdoors. It might be your yard, a patio, a nearby forest area. It might be a beach. It might be the desert. It might be stepping out simply into fresh air if you're in an urban environment, far from natural areas. Just getting out of the four walls. Okay? That's the first thing, a place that's safe and comfortable and private. And I highly recommend you don't have your phone on, engaged with it. So many of us are very connected to our devices and reliant upon them, but this is really an opportunity to let the natural world hold you and take care of you. Okay, so finding that safe place and then going there and resting there, sitting, lying down, walking, doing that on a regular basis. You can decide for you what regular means. For me, it's frequent. And it might be short little doses, or it might be a few short doses, and then I go out for a whole day because I really need to be out on the land. And then while you're there, after you've settled in, when you're feeling comfortable and soothed, notice what's going on around you. Notice what's happening in the natural world. If you go repeatedly, notice what remains the same and what might change. Because after all, the natural world is a mirror for us, or it can be a mirror. And so watch what's happening out there and then think about how that relates to what's happening in here for you. Okay, are you all still here? It looks like there's still participants on the call. That's good. I wish I could see you all. That's the hardest part about this call for me, is not being able to see and hear you. Okay, so let's move to compassion. You're still here. Hi, Maya. Thanks for confirming that. Appreciate that. So let's move into compassion. The heart of this call, the heart of this work, the heart of these practices is really about getting soft and tender and gentle and being loving in the face of really difficult circumstances. So here's another writing prompt. Again, I'll give you 2 to 3 minutes to just kind of get started, to just feel what it feels like to hear a writing prompt and to move through it a little bit. So here we go. What things do you do to take really good care of others who are hurting? Maybe you can list those briefly. Which of the things you listed are you willing to do for yourself? Is there anyone you can ask to help you hold your difficult feelings? And are you willing to ask for help? Those are a lot of prompts. Choose which one is juicy for you and spend a few minutes now, please, writing about that. Okay, so I've got a request to repeat that prompt. It's a long one. There are a lot of questions, so engage the one that is meaningful to you. What things do you do to take really good care of other people who are hurting? And what of those things are you willing to do for yourself when you are hurting? Is there someone you can ask to help hold your difficult feelings, to listen to you? And are you willing to ask for help? Okay, just take another couple seconds and finish your sentence or your thought. Maybe not your thought if you have a lot of thoughts like me. Maybe to just finish your sentence. Put your pens down. Remember to breathe. When we recognize that we instinctively know how to nurture others and to care for others, our children, our loved ones, our parents, our friends, we can remember that we need to care for ourselves as well. and that we know how to do that. This is one way, a way of many, that we can nurture compassion for ourselves. So now I'd like to offer a little example I will model for you. One way that we can begin to use nature, the natural world, as a way of generating compassion. So I have some images here. And for those of you who are not able to see images, if you're on audio only, I will do my best to describe what I have here. So what I'm holding up for the viewer is a photo I took of a natural area. It's a tree with a few small leaves still left on it, a thin tree. It's standing beside a lake. There are some bluish mountains in the background that are on the edge, the far edge of the lake, and some low clouds, white clouds that are hanging in. It's this is a place I went in the springtime here in the Pacific Northwest, so it was a pretty rainy, overcast day, and the image shows that. And so here's an example of how I might use an image of nature, and I also have some objects I'll demonstrate with a couple different things so that you can get an idea. This is one way that I can begin to connect myself with what seems very different from me. So I look at this image and there's a tree in it. And I think in some moment about, or I feel some connection to that tree. Wow, that's a really pretty tree, and it has some limbs that are kind of branching out. Most of them are branching out of the right side of the tree, but there's one limb that starts low and kind of angles off to the left. And then some moment I might think about those as pathways for my life. Oh, there are these many pathways I'm used to taking that are like the limbs on this one side of the tree, but maybe I'll take I'll check out this other limb that's by itself, this other new pathway. I might look at this image and see that the color of the water is very teal. It's very greeny blue, which happens to be a color I very much like. It's in my business name, in fact. And to look at that and to feel soothed by that, oh, that's what I needed today. I really needed to see that teal color, to feel that color of the heart. Oh, that's very soothing for me. And so we can use images of nature to actually begin to connect with what feels different. So I'm not a tree and I'm not water, although I'm a bag of water, right? I'm not a mountain or a cloud, but I can connect with those things. I can feel some moment of how I'm the same, or what I can learn, or some comfort I might get from those things in the image. Likewise, here's a stone. I'm holding up a very flat gray stone. If you only have audio, I'll hold it close for people who might be able to see. It's a very ordinary, very thin, flat, oval-shaped stone. And it's one of those stones that's good to hold in the hand and to feel comforted. In some moments when I'm out on a beach, I happen to be in a very calm place the day I collected this stone. This was very much a reflection of what was going on the inside of me. I felt peaceful and smooth, and I didn't have a lot of sharp edges going on in my inner landscape that day. So we can use things in the natural world, objects from the natural world, as well as images of the natural world, to begin this process of connecting with what seems different than us. And so translating that to an actual outdoor experience, what I'm in shorthand calling a practice commonalities with nature, is to go out into the natural world and focus on what seems different from you. A tree, the water, some creature. And looking at that, think about what you actually have in common with that. The tree uses air, we breathe air. The tree stands rooted and strong as the winds come and blow its boughs and its leaves, like we stand now, hopefully a little bit rooted as the winds of change and difficulty are moving through. I do see some questions coming in, and I will try to remember to answer all of those when we get to that portion. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate you guys being engaged. And then the third piece of this simple outdoor practice of connecting with what we see as the other is appreciating our sameness, appreciating what we learn or receive from what seems to be very different from us. Because when we can find our sameness with a non-human being, a plant, an animal, a creature, a landscape, it reminds us that we also have the potential to find common ground with other human beings who might feel really different from us. This is a way to nurture compassion for others. So I'm going to move into the final third of the practices, the kind action piece. This is where we really start taking our what's going on in us out into the world. We start practicing what we're preaching, what we're feeling, what we're hoping for, who we aspire to be. So here's a writing prompt. Again, you'll have several minutes to write about this. Get your pens ready or your fingers on the keyboard. The writing prompt is this: how can you actually begin to act more kindly in and toward the world? Create as long a list as you can right now. Yes, I will repeat that question for the writing prompt. How can you actually begin to act more kindly in and toward the world? Create as long a list as you can right now. You're welcome. just take another 30 seconds or so. Put your pens down, please. Remember to breathe. The first step toward behaving kindly in the world is knowing that we have a way to do that. Pretty simple, but you've just created a list or started a list of ways that you can offer yourself in softness, gentleness, kindness, compassion to the world. So let me go through the final practice with you. It's a nature practice. And I'm going to show an image again, and I'm going to describe it. And then for people who can't see it, and sort of what happened and what this image is. And then I will guide you through the steps for the nature practice for kind action. So what I'm holding up here is an image of what I call a nature altar. I created this in downtown Seattle on a Sunday, so it wasn't a bustling day, busy with people going to work, but there were definitely people around. I was on a sidewalk, a cement sidewalk next to a concrete building with a busy asphalt street and a lot of cars running by, and there happened to be a tree, which you can see the base of in this image. And knowing that I was going to be creating this nature altar there for actually an interview that I was part of, I brought some items from my backyard to create this nature altar. And I just gathered up that morning what was very easy and accessible to me. So I picked up some fallen yellow leaves that had fallen. This was about a month ago. I picked up a couple rocks that were in the yard. I scooped up a bunch of pine needles, most of which were brown, a little bit of moss, and a few other items, and maybe some twigs and flowers. And there happened to be a tree, oddly, that was down, had fallen down, had been broken off of a tree nearby, and so I was able to harvest a little bit of that twig item to put around the image. And so what I have here is a circular image of objects and items from the natural world. And I quietly gathered the items because I was being interviewed. I was asked to describe what I was doing, but I didn't use a lot of words. I mostly demonstrated that I was placing these in a simple arrangement that looked nice to me in the moment, given the conditions. It was also raining pretty hard that day. So I show you this because one way that we can begin to offer kindness freely without an expectation of being thanked is to make some beauty in the natural world. I like to thank you, someone just said it's beautiful. It is, it's a nature collage. As Arlene just posted on the sidebar. So what I like to do is to go out and to just have some quiet moments, to make something that feels nice to me, that feels pretty to me, that doesn't harm the natural world. So I'm not yanking things out of the ground or breaking living items, but using just what might be around on the ground. If you happen to live in a location where there isn't a lot, we're in a very abundant, rich natural area here in the Pacific Northwest, but if you're not, there are ways, even in the desert or at a patch of dirt, to create a very simple design. And so again, finding an outdoor space. Look at what covers the ground. Is there anything you might collect that's fallen, some seeds or twigs or dirt? Just a quick example, I facilitated this process with some students in the Berkeley area several years ago, and we were just at a local city park, And the area where we convened to do some of these practices was just kind of a dirt area. And the students made this really elaborate spiral that they kind of took the dirt with their hands and fluffed it up into these furrows and made a spiral. And that was the beginning of their act of making beauty in the natural world. And so then find and collect a few of these things that you might see, or think about how you might shape the dirt into a pattern that looks pretty, or even using the tread of a shoe and making some prints on the ground. Place the objects, if you have objects, in a circle, or create a circle. That's the simplest way to do it. But some of you who are clever and creative might get more elaborate. Do what is pleasing to you. And the intention is to really just enjoy this process, to get your hands touching the dirt, touching the flowers, touching the twigs and the rocks, and just to connect in a beautiful, calm way with a natural area. When we offer beauty for no reason and with no expectation of a thank you, the tree is not going to verbally say thank you. Although you might imagine when its boughs sway in a beautiful, graceful way, that's an acknowledgement of your effort. When we do these things in this way, we've moved into kind action. And if we can do this in the natural world, I think we can also do it in and for the humanity that is around us. This is a way to spread goodness and light during difficult times. So that is the end of the offering of 6 very, very simple practices. We can talk about ways to modify these to make them more challenging for you, or to make them simpler for you if that's where you're at. And please send in a question if you would like guidance with that. But I want to just make a note here, a few notes about self-care. Because we're talking about grief, and we're talking about being vulnerable in the world, and being kind when we're feeling a little sensitive ourselves. And so self-care is really important. And using these practices on a regular basis is also really important. They have a lot of potency when we repeat practices over time, because we learn naturally how to deepen them, how to make them meaningful for us in any given moment. So self-care, one way to do self-care with especially with the grief practices, the parts where we're really moving through the things that feel challenging for us, is to dose the amount of time that we do those practices. And what I mean by that is when we take medicine, hopefully, we don't drink the whole bottle at once. We take the recommended amount, an amount that taken regularly will make us healthy. Restore us to wholeness. And this is what these practices are. So if you're really challenged by writing your feelings, your anger, your fear, your feelings of despair across the page, then limit the amount of time each time you sit down to do that. Spend only a few minutes doing that if that particular one is challenging for you. But if it feels really good to lie down in a hammock in your backyard and enjoy the warm breeze on a summer day, then spend a little more time doing that practice until you've restored yourself a little bit. Okay, so there are ways to work with these very, very basic practices. And again, I tried to make them really, really simple today, partly because we're not out in a natural space and we have a very limited amount of time, but these can be as complex and elaborate as you need them to be. Another way to really do some self-care is to take some quiet time alone every day. And again, I mean the phone away, off, quiet, to just sit with ourselves, to remember who we are, to acknowledge that we're having feelings that might feel challenging, or that, to celebrate, I have a moment of peace right now. This is great. And also when you're going through some of these challenges, especially if you're grieving or you've lost somebody in that case of really acute grief, relax the demands you have of yourself just a little bit. You don't need to do all of the things that you normally do in a given day. You can do shorter bits of things that you need to do in a given day, but to just give yourself a little bit of spaciousness to be able to work through some of the things that you're feeling and experiencing. And remind yourself that this is a process. It's going to take time. We don't do one practice and suddenly feel better and everything's fixed and the world's grand and loving and compassionate. Not really. It doesn't really work like that. So how can we step into these things in a way that acknowledges that we're going to rejoice with the little tiny successes, the little tiny bits of insight we get when we're writing, the little bits of comfort that we receive in 10 minutes in an outdoor experience. So a couple quick reminders, and then we'll move into the question and answer part of today's call. Practices become more useful and potent the more we engage them. I recommend doing them on a regular basis. And what does regular mean? That really depends on you and your schedule and your inclination to engage these practices. I write every day, but I'm a writer. This is what I do. So I journal every day. I engage the natural world every day. I'm looking over to the other side of my office where I have what I call a nature calendar. And I take one object for every day, for every calendar day, and place it on a round template that I have. And I photograph it at regular intervals during the month. And it's just a quick, momentary way in my day to touch base with the natural world inside while I'm working. The nature-based practices, you'll do them as you can get out into the natural world. For some people, that'll be weekly. For some people, that'll be daily. We can engage these practices more deeply or more gently than we did today, or that you might do on a weekend versus on a work day. We can write with or without a prompt. I gave you prompts today just to kind of get you started, but you can certainly do free writing across the page and let whatever happens, happens. You can write about grief or whatever else is coming up for you. Getting reconnected with nature, building deeper relationships with place and nature really does serve to root and connect us with all beings, just as writing does help us connect more deeply with our inner landscapes. So I'm going to invite you now to an action piece, and then we're going to move into the questions. And here's my invitation. It takes the form of a question. How will you commit to one or more of these practices? Which ones? How often? Think about that for just a minute, and then please write a short intention that expresses this commitment for yourself. And I will literally give you 1 minute to do that. And Angelina, hi Angelina, asked me to repeat that invitation to action. How will you commit to one or more of these practices? Which ones? How often? And then write a short intention that expresses your commitment to yourself, to the world. And you don't have to get the wording just so or just right. It's just a way of capturing quickly what it is you feel willing to do, what you feel inspired to do, what you feel you have enough energy to do. I've seen some really great comments on the sidebar, including somebody who is talking about ideas for a self-compassion nature retreat. I am all over that idea. I like that. Thank you, Krista. So I'd like to move into a Q&A, a time for you guys to ask questions, to make comments. I just want to read one quote because I just don't want it to get lost at the end of the Q&A. It's a quote I just ran across, and some of you might also, if you subscribe to the gratefulness.org daily quotes, but this is by Anne Zwinger. And here's the quote. Dryness promotes the formation of flower buds. Flowering is, after all, not an aesthetic contribution, but a survival mechanism. So my prayer for you is that you use this trying time to bloom into compassionate, peaceful action. And on that note, I thank you so much for being here, and we're going to open it up for questions. I think Reed is going to help us by offering some questions out loud.
Yes, there are some questions coming up in Q&A. Kevin asks, can you implement these practices with all ages, kids and adults? How might you adapt some of these for different age groups?
Great. Now, Reed, can everybody else hear you asking that question?
Yes, they can.
Okay, thanks. I just had to be sure so I don't have to repeat it. Yes, actually, these are very adaptable with all ages. I've done some of these with very, very little kids, including essentially toddlers, preschoolers. And really, if you're working with a particular age group, you are the best expert at how for example, with children, what their tolerance will be for using these practices. Of course, I offer them as an adult to other adults, and the bulk of my clients that I work with daily are adults, that is between the age of 20 and 80. But it really, they can all be pared down. For example, with the writing practices, if you have children who aren't yet able to write, you can ask them to just say something in a word. And in terms of grief with children, actually, I'll make a special note and say there are tons of really wonderful books for children going through grief of various sorts. So if you're a person that does that kind of work, grief work, or working with children who are experiencing some kind of grief, do please check out those resources, or email me, and I will locate my list of resources and send them to you. But yes, these are adaptable for all ages. So, for example, the outdoor practices with adults, I've had people who are physically unwell, who are not very mobile, or are frail, or chronically ill, who have been able to engage outdoor practices on a very limited, minimal scale. And part of that is dressing appropriately for the weather. Part of that is limiting the amount of time. And part of it is really letting people gauge for themselves what their own tolerance is for being out in nature. And all of you have a different tolerance. I could be out there all day, all night for days and weeks at a time. That's just me, and I have some experience doing that in my life. But some people, it really is a stretch even to go outside in the backyard for an hour. And weather conditions and other kinds of things alter that for people. So really use your best judgment and listen. If you're working with people or you want to bring these practices to people, pay attention to what they're saying and what they're asking for and what their needs are. And you'll all be good. There's no right way or wrong way to do these.
Your email address is tealarborstories@gmail.com. Is that correct? And also folks can send questions or comments or request more information through the charter at contact at charterforcompassion.org, if that's a little easier to remember. And if you have an interest in sharing either anonymously or with your name or city, some of the things that you wrote today, we'd love to share them with Jennifer. And maybe if you indicate in an email to contact at charterforcompassion.org that it would be okay for us to share them more publicly, we'll include them in a report on this conference today as well. Beth has a question. How do I give space for the destructive greed and hate that is going on while opposing it and protecting myself and others?
That is the question of the year, isn't it? That is a great question. Thank you so much. And Reed, I might have to ask you to read that again in a minute. Would you read it again, actually?
How do I give space for the destructive greed and hate that's going on while also opposing it and protecting myself and others? So giving it space, but also responding and self-care.
Okay, thanks, Reed. So a couple things about that. This is something I've been working very actively, very consciously, very daily, multiple times a day in the last several weeks, definitely, and over time. And what I would say is one way to make space for it is to simply give it voice. And how can you do that? Well, you can do that through writing, obviously, in a journal or privately, or letters to people you trust and feel safe with. But when I start thinking about words like oppose and opposition, and I'm the first to say I'm really struggling with this myself, that I'm really inclined and feeling myself moving away from those kinds of words, like fighting injustice or opposing hatred, and moving into words about how can I move into this and just feel the sharp points of this right now, and then step forward with my best foot. And my best foot today might not look like my best effort tomorrow. Today I'm feeling strong and joyful and peaceful in this moment because I'm all with all of you. But in another moment, I might be feeling a little bit more tender again, or afraid, really afraid of what I feel I might be losing, or we all collectively might be losing in the near future. And so depending on where I am in a moment, I can step in and really, when I get out of myself and my own feelings for a minute and offer myself to somebody else in service, that's a great way to just give myself a little space and a little break, which is what I did several weeks ago. When we got some disturbing national news, for some of us disturbing national news, and I actually had already planned that next day that I was going to go out and do some random acts of kindness, because I had to be thinking about somebody else for a minute and offering myself. And the other thing I would say about opposing and having space for those difficult feelings is that acknowledging them is a really good first step, and then allowing them to be, and knowing that that's where we are, and that we're going to each find our little piece that we need to do that will actually be a positive, loving, compassionate response to what's happening. But until we get to that place where we feel the inclination for the kind action, we can still just sit with the difficulty. One final thing I'll say on that question is, I heard a wonderful statement by an activist, a woman I heard speaking years ago in downtown Seattle, who said, you know, I've given you all these inspirational ways to kind of go out and make change in the world. But what I would say first is, don't go home and make a list of all the great things you're going to do to be a hero in the world. Sit first with the pain. And after you've sat for a while, maybe a long while, like many months, then pay attention to what comes up as the spark, the inspired next step. So that's what I would offer you. Thank you. That's a long-winded answer.
We have another question about retreats. Krista asks, have you offered these practices in a retreat setting? As you're speaking, I've been thinking about the ways I can change my usual New Year visioning retreat to be self-compassion in nature. I would also, it would also be a good way for me to help me and others embrace winter here in the Northeast. So,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about retreats and ways that you've used these practices in a retreat setting.
Great, thanks. So what I've typically been offering in recent years is what I call workshops. They're often like retreats because it's tender people like yourself who really want to engage these practices. And we come together in intimate settings and do this work, sometimes in natural landscapes. But I am officially offering what I am calling a retreat at the Whidbey Institute in April for several days. Whidbey Institute is a place here in the Pacific Northwest on an island called Whidbey. And it's a beautiful natural setting and has lodging. And these kinds of practices I use over and over in many, many different ways, very many different versions of them. And so whether I call it a workshop or a retreat, there are sort of these same basic creative and writing-based and nature-based ways that I work with people. And yes, the new year is a great time, especially just after the solstice when we're celebrating the coming of light, but we don't really see it yet because it's still really dark and cold. And I use a lot of these practices also at those kinds of turning points, both individually for myself and with my family, but also with officially in my business with groups in natural landscapes or in cozy indoor settings where we have access to the natural world. And so, yes, please do those things. And if you're interested in talking about that, I'm very open to giving you more ideas or hearing your ideas or talking about them more via email.
So, could you give us a little more information, Catherine asks, about yourself and your work? Where do you work? What's the purpose of your work?
Wow. I always get a little bit stuck when I have to talk about myself, partly because I could either say nothing or I could talk for an hour, and I would like to find a balanced place in there. The first thing I would say is if you go to my website, you'll have way more information than you ever wanted or needed about me and the work I'm doing, just because there are many, many pages on the site, and it's very current with activities and reviews of things I've done recently and that sort of thing. But primarily, I'm a writer and a spiritual ecologist. The shortest way I can say what for me being a spiritual ecologist is really just seeing the sacred in the natural world and the sacred in nature, including human nature, and using that connection with the divine or the sacred. And it's not sectarian, it's not religion specific, but finding that divine or that sacred in all of us and in the natural world, and using that as a way to launch ourselves into a more compassionate way of being in the world. And one way I do that is through deep story work with my clients. And again, I'm happy to say more about that another time, or check out the website, or please email me personally and I'd be happy to respond. Thanks for your question.
There's a question about Tonglen, the Tibetan Buddhist practice. Can you comment a little bit on that practice and how it might relate to compassion? Obviously, it does.
Yes, Tonglen is awesome. And if you're not familiar with Tonglen, and the person who asked the question was probably much better versed in it than I am, although I am a practitioner of Tonglen, it's basically a practice of breathing in. It can be a practice of breathing in the pain that is in us and in the world, and breathing out calm and goodness and goodwill. That's a really crash shorthand version of explaining it. But for me, the practice of Tonglen really comes into play these days on a daily basis. And it can be as simple as something, where my aging dog hurts herself, and I breathe in that my own pain at seeing her in distress, and then breathing out words and expressions of healing. It might be taking care of her a little bit, or calling the vet or something like that. But in a bigger sense, I think it's a really wonderful practice for holding this challenge that many of us feel right now in the world, the upcoming things that feels scary, and to really move into that and to see where in myself am I afraid, and how can I what would I want for that? How can I soothe that fear or soothe that anxiety a little bit for me? And the same way that I might offer that to myself, I can offer it to the world. So I hope that addresses your question a little bit. Again, I think you're probably better versed in it than I am.
Carmen says that she took a course, The Science of Happiness. It was so enjoyable that I'm now wondering about the science of compassion. Information about the science of compassion. Anything to say about that today?
What I would say is please check out the Charter for Compassion's Education Institute. They have course offerings. There's one, I don't know if it's just ended or still in progress, on empathy. What is her course, Reed? Now I'm forgetting. I think it's on empathy.
Barbara Kerr is teaching an ongoing course, and you can find out more information about that, about how to enable compassion in your life. I don't know. I think maybe the registration is concluded. I see Marilyn has rejoined us. I don't know if she can hear us, but there's information about that, and I know it will be offered again. We're continuing to offer that course. And there's also other information on the Charter website about the science of compassion.
And I guess I can branch out, since I'm just Jennifer of Teal Arbor Stories, and say something that isn't exactly Charter for Compassion based, but certainly consistent values. And one is down in Berkeley, there's the Greater Good. I can't remember the whole name of it. If you write to me, I can give you the full name and link you to their newsletter. But there are all kinds of organizations out there now looking at the science of compassion, including gratefulness.org. There are articles on that website often. The Greater Good Center, all kinds of individual practitioners I know who are looking at this stuff, mindfulness professors down in Stanford, and all kinds of people. So again, if you want specific resources, my brain functions better when I have my fingers on a keyboard, and I can actually send you resources if you want some. So feel free to email.
Yes, I did find the Greater Good website, and I believe I put it in the chat box. So if
exactly, yep, thanks. Yeah, I see.
If people are interested in that, then that's a great place to start as well. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's a myriad of research that shows the relationship between our hardwiring for compassion and the kinds of ways that practicing and making compassion more potent in our lives has long-term consequences for our own health as well. And the name of the course that Barbara is teaching is Emotional Intelligence for a Compassionate World.
Right. Her stuff is great, by the way. I took her course. This is a little plug. I took her course as kind of a sampler, as a prospective facilitator for the Education Institute, the Charters Education Institute. And her course was fantastic. It was really thoughtful, thought-provoking, hurtful, most of all.
Joan Levine says the Compassion Listening Project at compassionatelistening.org has teachings throughout the country. She says we in Portland are compassionate listening facilitators, and they have a workshop coming up this weekend. So go to compassionatelistening.org, and I'll put that in the chat as well.
Great, thanks, Joan. Sounds awesome, actually.
Let's see. Joan also asked if you could, at some point before we wrap up here, repeat the quote that you shared, which was so lovely, as we were going into this section.
So the final quote, the Ann Zwinger quote, I will repeat it. Dryness promotes the formation of flower beds. Flowering is, after all, not an aesthetic contribution, but a survival mechanism.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to type that out or send my notes to anyone who wants them to, by the way.
Yeah, we'll put together a report on this presentation, and everybody who registered will get that information as well. So,
Great.
So you and I can talk about what those things are and make sure that we get everything in the report.
Great.
I don't know if you have some final thoughts. We're kind of getting close here to the wrap up.
I saw some question up here in the queue I wanted to address. Let me just look for a second here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, they've been coming in all along, so no worries.
Oh, there was a question about elephants.
Oh, yeah. The elephants behind me, actually, you should be able to see there are 7 of them. They cannot be separated. I bought those elephants in Burma in 1996 when I was there doing some research, and I bought them because they were neat, and they're hand-carved wood elephants made by the gracious, lovely Burmese people. And I bought them, and I've had many. I've moved all around the country over and over again since I've had those guys, and there are still 7. And apparently it's not very fortuitous to separate them out or to lose anybody along the way. So I'm just grateful that I have all 7, but they're just up there because neighbors have fun walking by and seeing the elephants marching up the road. So that's all.
And let's see, the last thing I might just mention is that, as I said, we'll send out a report. I'm not sure exactly what the status of the recording is, but Jennifer and I can talk about that offline and get back to you about information about that. And as she said, there's a lot of information on her website, tealarborstories.com. And you're open to answering questions from many of our participants today, right?
Absolutely. I see a question here about using my presentation. Of course, please use these ideas, use these practices with anybody and everybody. That's the point. I'm just here today because I wanted to share them with you. And my hope is that we will all become practitioners of these things. Yes, please. That was from Lisa, I think. Now I've lost the thread.
That's right. Let me just look to see if there are, so that was the answer to Lisa's question. I would also like to let people know about a couple of upcoming events if this is a good time for that. I don't know if there's anything you want to share about what's coming up next with you, Jennifer.
I will say that I'm really hoping to get a little downtime this holiday season. That's the first thing I'm hoping for. But I do have a lot of things coming up in just after the new year. One is the Whidbey Island Retreat, and it's a very, very small offering. There are only, less than 15, perhaps only 10 spaces available. So if people are interested in that, please contact me. There's a tiny little write-up about it on my website on the workshops and offerings page. And I'll be co-facilitating that with an incredible human being who is Mr. Compassion himself, an astute, award-winning writer-producer named Bert Kempner. And he'll be co-facilitating that workshop with me on Whidbey. Before that, though, I do have at least monthly local workshop offerings, but I'm always happy to offer workshops or convenings of people for building practices, using these practices for various purposes in online formats. And now that I've had Reed as the tech support for this Zoom, I'm seeing that it's probably easier to use than I imagined or feared. And so there are a lot of different ways. Most of my clients actually I work with online. So I would say if you're interested in any of these practices or you have a group of people who are interested, please let me know, because I can offer these things, especially via Skype, where we can have some direct engagement face to face.
Well, and with smaller groups, it's definitely possible to do that with Zoom.
Yes. I think the format does the name of the host doesn't matter. It's that a lot of these programs are capable of doing that sort of direct face-to-face engagement. So yes, I have things that I offer on a regular basis, and I do work with people one-on-one. So for people who want a little more intensive and very specific, focused on their project, writing or otherwise, I work with people in that way.
And Larry Downing notes that he suggests Greg Boyle videos as something that you might want to look for.
Thank you. I'll check that out.
And then I'm sorry.
Sorry, Reed, is there a way that we can capture the information that's in the sidebar? People are sending in a lot of good links and things.
Yep, I will be saving the chat, and so I'll send that to you as well.
Great, thank you.
And we can include material that we get from there in our report.
Great. One other quick thing I was going to say in regard to my offerings is that I am going to also make an online curriculum available that has some of these practices and some other things as well. And that should be available starting hopefully February-ish. And that would be a rolling, people can sign up whenever they want for that sort of thing. So I am trying to sort of expand what I'm offering and how I'm offering it to be accessible to a broader audience.
I want to let people know that we have an upcoming event in February. We have a process called Global Read, where we invite everybody who is interested to read a book together, and then we have the author join us, and in this case, the author and a main character in the book. We're reading How Fast Can You Run by Harriet Levin Miller. And How Fast Can You Run is the inspiring true story of a 5-year-old boy's flight from war in southern Sudan and the journey to find his mother. We're going to be doing the read, the online Zoom call, on February 22nd. And you can register for that on our website. But you can pick up the book and start it before you even figure out where we are to register. How Fast Can You Run? Harriet Levin Miller. So that's February 22nd, and we hope that folks here will join us for that call. And we're always looking for volunteers, especially to help work in our education, environment, restorative justice, social justice, and our women and girls sectors. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, contact us at contact@charterforcompassion.org. And also, if you have notes from today's session with Jennifer that you'd like to share, you can also send those to contact@charterforcompassion.org, and we'll share them with her. And if it's okay with you, with everyone else. Thank you. Yes, as I'm seeing in the chat, thank you for your wisdom today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you all so much for being here. It is such a pleasure to just sit here in the comfort of my own office and be able to offer very, very simple practices to you that you can embrace in whatever way works for you. And I wish you all blessings. May your hearts be peaceful and well, even in trying times.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.